Hello, and welcome to Learning is Not Quiet presents DNA, what makes you, you. Believe it or not, DNA is basically like the computer code of biology. It tells us what we're going to be and the physical characteristics and even some of the internal characteristics, the behavioral characteristics that we have. It determines what color your eyes are going to be, what color your hair is, whether or not you can do this. Like 25% of you watching this cannot do that. And it tells us which hand we use to write with. Of course, other things are infected by our surroundings, by the environment that we grew up in, but a lot of who we are is determined by our DNA. So that's what we're talking about. DNA is important because it helps us understand ourselves. Secondly, it helps us understand diseases, if that's something you're interested in, and medicine, because a lot of medicine is either stopping, changing, or preventing some kind of change in DNA. So let's get started. What is DNA? DNA is a name for deoxyribonucleic acid. Say it 4 times with me. Deoxyribonucleic acid, deoxyribonucleic acid, deoxyribonucleic acid, deoxyribonucleic acid. You sound really smart every time you say it. DNA is short for deoxyribonucleic acid and is pictured here. It stores and passes genetic information from one generation to the next. It tells your cells what to do and also contains your inherited information. So it's basically a set of instructions that says our skin cells are going to be whatever color. It says that our hands are going to be whichever one is more dominant. We get it from our parents. It's also important to understand how DNA was discovered. The discovery of the structure and function of DNA did not happen overnight. Many scientists from all over the world contributed to our current understanding of this molecule. In 1869, Friedrich Miescher identified a substance that would later be known as DNA. So he's the very first person to be like, yo, DNA, it's a thing. Then we're skipping ahead to the 1950s. In between here, and especially if you're talking about this in 7th grade, is also Gregor Mendel, who studied genetics and kind of the role that DNA plays in affecting what happens in us. We're not going to talk about that right now because we're focusing on the physical structure and what DNA is. So the next person is really cool. I love it because she's an underrated female scientist, is Rosalind Franklin. And she created images of DNA using X-rays, invented by another awesome female scientist. When an X-ray passes through this DNA molecule, the ray bends and creates a pattern that was captured on this film shown here. So that X is actually showing that DNA. And in 1953, James Watson and Francis Crick, or Watson and Crick, used Chargaff's rules and the X-ray images of DNA from Rosalind Franklin to conclude that DNA looks like a long and twisted ladder. So Rosalind Franklin came up with the first images of DNA. Watson and Crick, they kind of determined what that shape would be and used kind of math and chemistry to put it together into this twisted double helix. They built a large-scale model of DNA using simple laboratory materials. Watson, Crick, and Wilson won the Nobel Prize for discovering DNA. Even though Rosalind Franklin was instrumental in discovering DNA, she died of cancer at age 37. And this was before the Nobel Prize was awarded, and the rules stated that the recipient had to be alive. So unfortunately, because she died, possibly because of the very science she was discovering, she did not get to participate in kind of the recognition and accolades that came with her research, which makes her even cooler in my opinion. Being a woman scientist in the 1950s, and a lot of people argued that Franklin didn't get as much credit for her work because she was a woman. And so Watson described Rosalind Franklin as belligerent, emotional, and unable to interpret her own data. So it's clear that kind of sexism played a role in how DNA was developed. So find your heroes in that story and kind of learn from what the history tells us. So moving on from what basically DNA is, it's the genetic information that tells us who we're going to be, to how DNA was discovered. Let's now talk about the shape of DNA. DNA has a very funny shape. It is a helix structure. Helix means twisted, and double refers to the double strand it has. It basically looks like an old school ladder that you took and twisted in on of itself. It looks like a twisted spiral staircase. The DNA molecule is made of 3 distinct parts. These parts are put together are called a nucleotide. A nucleotide is made of a sugar phosphate nitrogen base. And we'll talk about that more in the future. Nitrogen bases are what connect and hold the specific information of DNA. So just like a lot of computer data is ones and zeros, it's just a basic 0 or 1, but that information codes all that happens on the internet from TikTok to this video that you're watching right now. Nucleotides determine the difference between different organisms and even between different individuals in a species. So your body reads the DNA like a code. It tells your cells what to do and decides who you're going to be. The order of these pairs is the code red. So nitrogen bases are paired adenine and thymine, A and T. They're always put together. And cytosine and guanine, C and G, are always put together. And what's kind of crazy, just as a final thought, my dog and I, we share 25% DNA, if you can believe that. This little fur ball that has hair all over her face cannot find the pee pad and insists on going on the couch you see behind me on a regular basis. We share 25% DNA. And so it's really that 75% difference that makes all of the difference. And if that's not crazy enough, you share 99.9 repeating percent with every member of your family. So next time you're in an argument with someone who's related to you, just remember you have the same DNA. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to purchase the worksheet that comes with this video, the links in the description are found below.